Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. We're glad you're here for today's webinar, Intermittent Fasting and Meal Timing. Does when you eat matter? I'm Greg Berry, Director of Communications in the Office of Alumni Affairs. A disclaimer, as with any virtual event, occasional technical hiccups may occur. If you experience any video or audio issues, simply click reconnect or refresh your screen to return to the presentation quickly. Let's start off by getting a sense of your day-to-day habits. This will give us a sense of who's in our audience. What best describes your typical eating pattern? Please select one of these. Your meal times are set consistently. While you eat regularly, timing may vary. You let your calendar dictate when you grab a bite, or there's no rhyme or reason in when you eat. Go ahead and make your selection. We're going to take a look at those results in just a moment or two. Just a heads up, we are recording today's webinar. Our live audience will get an email with the link once it's ready. Today, we're thrilled to have Dr. Olivia Altonji with us. Dr. Altonji is a postdoc fellow in UAB's Nutrition Obesity Research Center and the Department of Nutrition Sciences. She earned her Ph.D. in Nutrition Sciences from Auburn. So before we turn things over to Dr. Altonji, let's take a look at the results of that earlier poll. And I still see things coming in. I'm going to go ahead and lock that in. I think it's set. What best describes your typical eating pattern? 54% try to eat regularly, but say it varies. 21% say structured meals at consistent times. Now, thanks for giving us that insight. As we transition into today's presentation, another quick question. When do you typically eat your largest meal? Your selections are straightforward: breakfast, lunch, dinner, or it just varies daily. I'm going to go ahead and keep that poll up for a bit and drop the results in the chat. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Altonji. Welcome. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Us as well. And you're going to go ahead and share your slides, so we'll let you do the keystrokes as you get to those while this poll gets going.
I'm very interested. I think you stole something from my slides there, asking when people eat their largest meal.
And the funny thing is, I got these, I think last week is when I came up with the poll questions, and I'm glad it matches with what we're going to be discussing. So at this point, the platform's yours.
Great. Can you see my just my big slide there?
We sure can.
Great. All right. Well, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. As Greg said, I'm Olivia Altonji. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the nutrition department, and I work for Dr. Courtney Peterson. Dr. Peterson was at UAB for 9 years before she transitioned to Harvard last summer. So I'm still working at UAB, wrapping up her clinical trials here, and she has very generously shared some slides with us today. So I have nothing to disclose as far as financial disclosures. So today we'll be discussing what intermittent fasting is and what the different types are, whether intermittent fasting can help you lose weight, what we know about the effects of intermittent fasting on blood sugar and cardiovascular health, whether intermittent fasting has benefits even if you don't lose weight, how it can affect the aging process, and how meal timing matters. So things like skipping breakfast or eating late at night. And then we'll also touch on some intermittent fasting studies that have been conducted at UAB and how UAB is helping move the science into the future. So why is this important? Why is our diet important? So there was this global burden of disease study that looked at the top causes of death around the world. And if you look at the top 4, diet is number 1 with over 32% of attributed to 32% of total deaths. And that's more than alcohol, tobacco, and drugs put together, more than pollution or infectious disease. And so our lifestyle is really important. And it's kind of encouraging that our diet is one of the top things that contributes to how long we live, because it's something we have control over. So intermittent fasting, what is it exactly? So Dr. Peterson was part of a committee from around the world that got together to nail down what is the definition of intermittent fasting. And it's defined as periodically or regularly fasting for a time period of 14 to 48 hours at a time. And so the reason for the 14-hour minimum is, if you look at our little graph here, can you see my mouse? I think so. If you eat your meal here, we'll call this 0 minutes since you've eaten dinner, or 0 hours since you've eaten dinner. As you move through time, you are able to start burning more fat. And at about 14 hours, your body's burning mostly fat. And we think that this fat burning process in particular is really important for our health. Once you get past 48 hours, so 2 full days of fasting, it's what we would call prolonged fasting. But intermittent fasting can affect multiple aspects of our health. So our metabolism, cognition, so how well we think, as well as our cardiovascular disease health. And a lot of our research on the effects of intermittent fasting so far have been in animals. There have been hundreds, probably thousands of studies of intermittent fasting in animals. And this is where a lot of our knowledge comes from. So studies in animals have shown that intermittent fasting improves brain function, can cause weight loss, helps with cancer prevention, and can even slow the growth of cancer, can reverse type 2 diabetes, can increase lifespan, decrease molecular damage or oxidative stress. You may have heard some things about free radicals. It can decrease your blood sugar and improve your body's ability to control your blood sugar, improve motor function, so that's things like your muscular strength, and can also help improve your heart health. So that's great. What about in people? So in humans, we have a good bit of research at this point, but not quite as much as in animals. So we have 225 clinical trials so far in humans of different types of intermittent fasting. So we'll go through each of these in detail in a minute, but I want to talk about just the broader categories here. So there are 3 kind of broad categories of intermittent fasting approaches. So the first type is what we would call periodic approaches, which is where you're fasting for at least 24 hours at a time. And during that fasting period, you're only having water, and this is some number of times per week or per month. So examples include fasting 1 day a week and alternate day fasting, where you're fasting every other day. And this fasting 1 day a week is popular in some religious traditions. And then our next form of intermittent fasting is called modified fasting approaches. And instead of a water-only fast on your fasting days, you are eating a very low-calorie diet, which is equivalent to about 500 calories or less, so 1 meal. And there's a version of alternate day fasting called alternate day modified fasting, which uses this approach. There's also the 5-2 diet, where you're doing the modified fast 2 days a week. And then there's the fasting mimicking diet, where you're doing the modified fast for several days in a row. And then the third category of approaches is what we would call daily intermittent fasting approaches. And this is typically termed TRE, or time restricted eating. And this is where you're fasting every day for at least 14 hours. So we'll go through each of these in detail. So we'll start with fasting 1 day a week. This, I think, maybe is the simplest. So 1 day a week, you are fasting with only water for 24 hours. And the largest study of this is called the Wonderful Trial, which is a great name. Sad they stole that one. And this was a 6-month clinical trial in over 100 adults. And what they were trying to do with this study was to see if fasting could lower people's LDL cholesterol, or bad cholesterol. And unfortunately, it did not make any changes in LDL cholesterol. People did lose weight, about 3.8 pounds, but that was short of statistical significance, meaning we don't really know if that was due to chance or not. But it did improve insulin resistance, which is a measure of how well your body can control your blood sugar, and it reduced people's risk of metabolic syndrome, which includes things like diabetes and heart disease. So it appears that there are some benefits here, but this is not the strongest form of intermittent fasting if you're looking for strong benefits. The next form is called alternate day fasting, or ADF. And this, as the name suggests, alternates days of water-only fasting with days of freely eating. And initially, they didn't know if this was going to cause weight loss or not, because it was thought maybe people can compensate and eat extra on their normal days. But it turns out that it's really impossible to catch up on a whole day of missed food. So this does cause weight loss. However, the participants in these studies were really hungry, like they were hangry. They were not having a good time. They could not adapt. So this was really hard to follow. So there are not a lot of studies that still go on with this form of fasting. Although there are some studies that are still going in people with severe obesity. But they did find that this form of intermittent fasting reduced blood pressure, reduced heart rate, improved cardiovascular disease risk, and reduced cholesterol relative to a control group that wasn't fasting. So this is great. We've got some benefits. However, it was equivalent benefits to people that were calorie counting, so more traditional dieting. The next form is called alternate day modified fasting. So that fasting day is modified. You're eating equivalent to one meal. And then the other days you're eating normally. And this also causes weight loss. And this caused weight loss more slowly than when you're doing the water only fast. But it still did cause a 5% weight loss, which is really important when we talk about how much weight people are losing in these studies. 5% is kind of the minimum of what we would call clinically significant weight loss. And that means that's how much weight you need to lose in order to start seeing benefits for your health, like blood sugar and blood pressure control. So in this study, people were able to lose 5% of their weight in 12 weeks and also reduced lipids and inflammation. And people were able to improve their liver health as well. On the other hand, it did not work better than calorie counting. They were equivalent. And again, people found this harder to follow than just counting calories. So the next form is the 5-2 diet. So instead of fasting every other day, you're only doing the modified fast 2 days a week. So again, that very low calorie diet where you're eating less than a meal a day, 2 days a week that can either be consecutive or non-consecutive. So you could do, have several days in between the fasting period or do them next to each other. And we now have 5 year-long studies of this, which good news, that means people were able to hang in there and do this for a whole year long. And they found that it reduces body weight, blood pressure, blood sugar, and triglycerides relative to people that were not doing this. So a large kind of range of benefits. And they found that at least for the first 6 to 12 weeks, this was more effective than calorie counting. But when you got to a year out, they noticed that the weight was not different. So people initially lost more weight, but then at the end it evened out. And when they kind of looked into this, they realized that when people were really strictly following this 5-2 diet, they lose more weight than people who are calorie counting. But after a year, people got a little more relaxed. And so it ended up being about equivalent. There was also a study of people with type 2 diabetes with the 5-2 diet, and it was actually found that it caused diabetes remission in some people, which means they were able to regain control of their blood sugar. The next type we'll discuss is called the fasting mimicking diet. And this is a diet that's very low in protein, and it's 700 to 1100 calories per day for 3 to 5 days at a time. Most of the research is on doing this for 5 days at a time. And this is a more dramatic form of intermittent fasting. And in people with type 2 diabetes, this has been shown to reduce their hemoglobin A1C, which is a measure of their blood sugar over the past few months. It reduced medication use by 43%, and it caused a 4 to 13% weight loss. So if you remember, that 5% is kind of the minimum, and it's what we see in a lot of gentler forms, I'll call them, of intermittent fasting. But this 13% is a lot of weight loss. So this is kind of one of the more intense forms for weight loss. Interestingly, it also lowers IGF-1 or insulin-like growth factor 1, which is a cancer risk factor. And we'll talk a little bit more about the impact of intermittent fasting on cancer a little bit later. Oh, an important thing I forgot to mention here. When you're doing this for 3 to 5 days at a time, this is typically done no more than 1 time a month. So people might do this multiple months in a row, but this is not practiced for more than 1 round per month. And then I am a little bit biased because Dr. Peterson's lab exclusively works in time-restricted eating. So this is my favorite form of intermittent fasting, is time-restricted eating, or TRE. So TRE is daily intermittent fasting, where you're fasting for at least 14 hours per day, which means you're eating within a consistent 10-hour or less eating window. And what we call an eating window is the time between the first bite of food or the first sip of calories you consume in a day, and then between that and the last sip or bite of calories that you have in the day. And the 16-8 diet is the most popular. So this is 16 hours of fasting with an 8-hour eating window. And some of the more popular eating windows for this study are, for example, eating from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. or eating from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m. While you're fasting, you're only drinking water and no calorie beverages. Unfortunately, even some of these very low calorie beverages, they're 15 calories or less, can be enough to take our body out of that fasting state. The beauty of this approach is that you are counting time, not calories. So it's a lot simpler than trying to track your food. But you also can add this in addition to other dietary approaches. So you can practice it at different times of day with or without cutting calories, although typically people do tend to eat less even without trying, the shorter that window gets. And this can be followed for 5 to 7 days a week. So if you follow this every day, you're going to have the greatest benefits. But the research shows that people who are doing this at least 5 days a week are going to be able to gain some benefits. So if you decide you want to take the weekend off, you can still see some benefits from this. And TRE is also good for weight loss. So now we have 6 year-long studies of this, and they reported pretty good adherence, which meant that when we told people to do this for 7 days a week, it meant that they were able to do it realistically at least 6 days a week. So that's great. And this study I'm showing you over here on the right compared 8-hour time restricted eating versus calorie counting, which is that CR line in the bottom. And you can see TRE and calorie counting did comparably as well for helping people lose weight, especially when you compare them to this control group, which actually gained a little bit of weight at the end of the year. So overall, these studies combined showed that people lost about 4 to 7% of their weight loss for that 6 to 12 month time period. So a question we get all the time is, should women intermittent fast? Is intermittent fasting better for men? And there are likely no differences in response to time restricted eating between men and women. So there are not a lot of studies directly putting men and women head to head for these benefits. But the studies that we know of that have, analyzed the results that way at the end have not found any differences between men and women. And we also get asked, does it matter if you're pre or postmenopausal? And as you can see over here on the right, pre and postmenopausal women lost basically identically the same amount of weight in a TRE study. And then women with PCOS, which was recently renamed PMOS, so polyendocrine metabolic ovarian syndrome, versus polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is a very common endocrine disorder in women, meaning that it affects their reproductive hormones. Time-restricted eating may be beneficial for weight loss, improving those reproductive hormone levels, and improving insulin sensitivity. And this is really important because this is a group of people who tend to have a lot of difficulty losing weight for hormonal reasons. So it's really promising in that population. And then intermittent fasting is not recommended for women who are pregnant or breastfeeding. We just don't have the research at this time to say that that's safe. So we're losing weight. Where are we losing it from? Is it all fat? Are we able to preserve that muscle? And so studies have shown that there are no negative effects of TRE on muscle or bone. So for example, in people who are resistance training, so lifting weights, there's no difference between TRE and control, which is just eating a normal time, in muscle protein synthesis, which is what people are trying to maximize when they're drinking a protein shake after the gym. So that's making the proteins in the muscles. There's no difference. And there was no difference in muscle strength in people doing a bench press. So people were still able to gain strength at the same rate if they were doing TRE or not. And so this is really interesting because, that's something that people worry about anytime there's weight loss is whether or not you're losing muscle and how much. So there have been no differences shown in any study on things like muscle strength, muscle size, or sports performance. So how does intermittent fasting cause people to lose weight? So Dr. Peterson's lab, about a decade ago, before we really knew how intermittent fasting worked, was really interested to see what the main mechanism was that was helping people lose weight. So they didn't know if they were burning more calories or if they were just eating less food. So they put people in what's called a respiratory metabolic chamber, which you can see here, looks like a dorm room. So people are put in this room, which is completely sealed off to the outside world. And we're able to estimate how many calories, carbs, and fat that they're burning. So in this study, they put people in here for 24 hours that were either doing a 6-hour TRE or they were doing just an eating over a normal schedule. And they found that the people eating the normal schedule and the people doing TRE burned exactly the same number of calories. Okay, well, maybe they're burning more fat. So it turned out that people were actually burning more fat in the TRE group. So people who are doing the 18-hour fast, that 6-hour TRE, were actually burning more fat. So this is a number called a respiratory quotient. The lower this is, the more fat you're burning. The higher it is, the more carbs you're burning. And so particularly at night, so you can see this is 8 p.m. here, people in the control group were burning more carbs, whereas overnight people in the TRE group were burning more fat. That said, if you're burning more fat, if you're not eating any less calories or burning less calories, you're not going to lose weight. So what about eating less? So they were curious, while they had the people in this dorm room, they also measured their appetite. And it was found that the TRE group, in TRE, reduced ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone. So they were really surprised by this because they expected that people who were only eating from 8 a.m. to 2 p.m. were going to be starving in the evening. But what they found is actually TRE helped people keep their hunger levels level throughout the day versus the control group, in addition to lowering that hunger hormone. So now we have more studies on this and find that in general, intermittent fasting suppresses hunger, except when you get to about 1 to 2 hours before bedtime. So if you can push through that hunger right before bed, usually people are pretty good at sticking with their intermittent fasting. So in addition to suppressing appetite, yes, it makes people eat less. So the study on the left here was actually done at UAB by Dr. Peterson's lab. So this is a 14-week study in 90 adults with obesity. And everyone in this study was getting weight loss counseling at the Weight Loss Medicine Center here at UAB. And they were able to, they were already counting calories and trying to lose weight. So when you added TRE to that, people were able to cut an additional almost about 250 calories a day, which resulted in an extra ½ pound a week of weight loss. So you can see here, people just doing the calorie counting are in light blue, and people who are doing TRE plus calorie counting are down here where they lost more weight. And another really large study in Spain in 200 adults with obesity showed that TRE helped people cut 250 calories a day. But also they looked at the different times. So no matter what time of day they put their TRE window, they lost the same amount of weight and they cut the same number of calories. So TRE also can help improve your blood sugar. And we know that in people with diabetes, there have been several studies. This 6-month study of 8-hour TRE showed that people were able to reduce their blood sugar, their hemoglobin A1C, and also reduce the need for diabetes medications. But the question that we've kind of started to ask about intermittent fasting is this due to weight loss? So if you lose weight in general, if you hit that 5% threshold, you do typically tend to have some health benefits. So is intermittent fasting just a different way to cut calories, or is there something special about intermittent fasting, something special about the timing? So Dr. Peterson was very interested in this question. So she did a study where people did TRE, but they did not lose weight. So she kept everybody weight stable and put them in a continuous glucose monitor. These are really popular now. You've probably seen them on the backs of people's arms. And monitored their blood sugar across the course of the day. And people were given these kind of standard meals. So everyone's getting the same amount of sugar in the meal. And so you can see our control group here in gray. In the evening, they have this big blood sugar spike, whereas the TRE group that's finished eating earlier in the day, they have much lower blood sugar at night. And overall, this means that the TRE group ended up having a much lower average blood sugar across the day. So even though they didn't lose weight, they were still better able to control their blood sugar. They did some additional studies here and found that this wasn't just because of, maybe we're shoving all of those meals together. They also had better insulin sensitivity, which is how well your body is able to lower your blood sugar when you release insulin, and also was able to help their pancreas make insulin. So TRE also improves our heart health. So this is a really interesting study on the left, assessing fitness in older adults. And this graph here on the left is 6-minute walk distance. So this is where you tell somebody, on your mark, get set, go, and see how far they can walk in 6 minutes. So TRE, which also is called time restricted feeding, or TRF, was able to help people walk farther in 6 minutes, and also meant that their heart didn't have to work as hard. Their heart rate stayed lower while they were doing physical activity. And this is really, really interesting because there was no exercise intervention in this study. They were not doing any exercise different. All they changed was the time of day that they were eating. So really interesting. And there was a study of TRE in heart function and heart attack patients. So they were able to find that left ventricular ejection fraction, which is a fancy way of saying how well your heart is pumping blood, was actually improved in people doing TRE. So again, not doing any exercise here. We're not doing anything different to our heart, but somehow we're making it function better. So this is a really interesting area of study now. Interestingly, even talking back to that wonderful trial that we talked about much earlier, people have theorized that intermittent fasting would help people's cholesterol. And overall, there are really not many studies that show any benefit for fasting cholesterol level, which is like what you get measured at the doctor when you go in first thing in the morning and they're testing your fasting cholesterol. So is there a possible benefit here? And there's a year-long study in monkeys that showed that TRE improved reversed cholesterol transport. And that is a really fancy way of saying it helps protect against these plaques forming in your arteries in heart disease. And another interesting thing about this study is that this was true in both adult and geriatric monkeys. So this research has yet to be replicated in people, so we haven't done this in humans yet. But I think there's more to the story than just intermittent fasting doesn't change your cholesterol. We think that there's probably something going on. It's just a little more complicated. So we've talked about our heart health, but what about hypertension? What about high blood pressure? So we know that TRE and other forms of intermittent fasting can improve blood pressure, but there are very few studies that have been done in people with hypertension. And the best data we have so far, excuse me, comes from this study that I've got up on the screen here, which studied the DASH diet with or without time-restricted eating. And so the DASH diet, if you may have heard of this, it's dietary approaches to stop hypertension is what it is the acronym. And it helps people lower the salt or sodium in their diet. And it's also rich in nutrients that help you lower your blood pressure, like potassium. And so we know that this diet does help people lower their blood pressure. And when you add TRE to that, it helped people lower their blood pressure by an additional 4 to 5 points. And that was both their systolic and diastolic blood pressure. So also, if you take data from all of the studies of TRE and you put them together in a meta-analysis, they show that TRE improves blood pressure. So this is a really interesting up-and-coming field as well. The 5-2 diet, switching gears a little bit. So we're going to talk about some other benefits of intermittent fasting, but maybe not directly TRE. So the 5-2 diet reduces brain aging and improves memory and executive function. So what on earth is this? So brain age score is actually uses brain imaging in order to kind of create this estimate of how old someone's brain is. So in this study, there were 40 older adults that were either doing the 5-2 diet or they were given a pamphlet on healthy living. And it was found that the people on the 5-2 diet were able to have a lower brain age after the study compared to the healthy living. They also had better memory and better executive function. And executive function is things like how well your brain can plan. So I mentioned earlier that the fasting mimicking diet is able to lower IGF-1, which is that cancer risk factor. So how do we know this? How did this come up? So a really interesting thing happened in animal studies where they realized that if you give chemotherapy or you fast an animal with cancer, you tend to have similar effects in terms of how well their cancer responds. So the more interesting thing is that if you combine fasting or the fasting mimicking diet with the chemotherapy, you end up having a much greater effect. So this was really exciting information in animals, but does this translate to people? And how does it work? Well, in normal cells, when you start fasting, they're perceiving kind of this threat, right? Like historically, if you're fasting, there's no food, maybe something's going on. So the cells in your body are prepared. They know that if you're fasting, if you don't have any food, some big stressor might come along, something dangerous might happen. And so your cells start putting their armor on. They're ready for battle. Now your cancer cells or malignant cells here, they have damage to their DNA, which is how they became cancerous. They're no longer able to put their armor on. They don't have those pathways anymore. So fasting stresses them out. So when you add chemotherapy, which is something that we know can kill cells, it's very stressful for the body. When your normal cells are fasting and you add your chemotherapy, they already have their armor on. They're more likely to survive. Now, if you have your cancer cells that are already stressed out, they're more likely to die when you add that chemotherapy because they're stressed out and they don't have these defenses on. And so this data here is from a clinical trial in over 130 women with HER2 negative stage 2 and 3 breast cancer. And so they either did the fasting mimicking diet or they did a regular diet. And they found that when they did this immediately prior to cancer treatment, the fasting mimicking diet had more people respond to treatment, more people's tumors shrink than people doing their regular diet. So this is really promising research, and a lot of this is currently ongoing in Italy. Also, can intermittent fasting slow aging? So the field of intermittent fasting has advanced, or the field of aging has advanced a lot in recent years. So it takes a really long time to study how long someone will live, right? So if I say I'm slowing my aging, am I going to turn the same age next year on my birthday? So we've developed these tools that allow us to estimate someone's age just from a blood draw. There's a couple different ways we can do this. One is looking at something called methyl groups that are attached to your DNA. And there's also kind of these snapshots we can get of different risk factors for disease in the blood that can tell us estimating how old somebody is. So now that we know how we're going to measure biological age, does intermittent fasting help? So specifically the fasting mimicking diet, which you can see here, we actually have an example of the fasting mimicking diet that was used in this study. It's called Prolon, and it has substitutes like soups, bars, teas. So if you're wondering what people are doing for this fasting mimicking diet. So when people did this for 3 months, they did 3 months where each month had one cycle of this fasting mimicking diet. It reduced people's biological age by 2.5 years. And they used one of the measures here that uses risk factors for different diseases. So this is really exciting research. There's actually a study looking at TRE with biological aging that has had a site here at UAB. So keep an eye out for the future of this aging research. So you're thinking, I'm sold, Olivia. Intermittent fasting sounds awesome. Does it matter what time I eat? If I do TRE, can I just eat whenever? So yes, the time of day that you eat matters. And you've probably heard of your circadian system or your circadian rhythms. And this is our body's internal biological clock, which makes us better at doing different things at different times of day. For example, this is 12 noon here. Our best coordination and reaction times are in the afternoon. We start making melatonin at night to help prepare our body for sleep. Obviously, we are sleeping at night. And then we have our highest alertness in the morning. So what about food? So we've actually known for about 50 years that our body is most prepared for food in the morning. If you give people the exact same amount of sugar and measure their blood sugar in the morning, in the afternoon, or the evening, the blood sugar doesn't get quite as high and it comes back closer to normal if you are giving this sugar in the morning versus if you give it in the afternoon and evening. So we now know our body is primed to deal with blood sugar, deal with carbs, best first thing in the morning. So, all right, should I eat a large breakfast? Well, there have been quite a lot of studies now that have tested this saying you've probably heard, which is eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. And one of the first really important studies is this one here, which is in 93 women with overweight. And they found that when women were assigned to eat a large breakfast, they lost significantly more weight than when they were assigned to eat a small breakfast and a large dinner. Which the really fascinating thing about this is that the women who were eating this large breakfast, even though they lost weight, they were less hungry. So on the other hand, the women who were eating a small breakfast and a large dinner were more hungry while they struggled to lose weight. And in people with type 2 diabetes, they decided to repeat this study and have people just do the schedule for 1 week. And this is really cool. Just over the course of a week of doing this schedule, people who ate a large breakfast had lower blood sugar throughout the day, lower average blood sugar, and also had higher insulin. And so in people with type 2 diabetes, having higher insulin is a good thing. So it's really incredible that these results were able to happen in just 1 week of doing this schedule. So the time of day that you eat your largest meal seems to be important. But what about breakfast skipping? If you Google, is breakfast skipping good or bad? You will come up with things on both sides. The research originally, or the evidence originally, was really confusing because some things say, yeah, it's better to skip breakfast. Other things say, no, it's terrible to skip breakfast. And we now think that the reason for that is due to the fact that a study in Japan showed that people who skip breakfast fall into 2 categories, roughly split in half. And half of people who skip breakfast only skip breakfast and they eat dinner at a normal time. So overall, they're eating over a shorter period each day. And then there's people who skip breakfast and eat dinner late. So they're eating over a longer period every day. So for example, this person might eat lunch at noon and dinner at 8, versus this person might eat lunch at noon and dinner at 10 or 11 p.m., something like that. And so we think that the people who are eating over a longer period of time, eating later at night, are the reason some studies show that it's bad for your health, versus people who are only skipping breakfast and eating dinner at a normal time. You might be missing out on the benefits of eating a big breakfast that we've shown in previous studies, but you're kind of protected and maybe still getting some of the benefits of practicing intermittent fasting, because if you're doing this regularly over eating that shorter period of time every day, then you're doing TRE. So this begs the question of what's more important, fasting duration, how long you fast every day, or the time of day that you eat. And Dr. Peterson's lab is really interested in trying to tease apart this question. So we think that for certain things, fasting duration is more important. So we think for body weight change, so weight loss, appetite, burning fat, and preventing molecular damage, we think that how long you fast is definitely the more important factor. But we think that for things like improving your blood sugar and your blood pressure, the time of day that you eat is probably more important. So both the time of day that you eat and the fasting duration appear to affect body weight. So this is epidemiological data, which means that we're looking at the whole population and kind of seeing health outcomes based on what people do in the real world. And this shows that the longer fasting duration correlates with a lower BMI. So people who are fasting for longer every night tend to weigh less than people who are fasting for a shorter period of time. And people who eat earlier in the day or have their largest meal for breakfast tend to also have a lower BMI than people who have their largest meal at dinner. And for scale here, most Americans on average eat over a 12-hour period every day and have about a 12-hour fasting period. Now, early TRE versus late TRE. So I mentioned earlier, some people do like to do it from 8 to 4 versus people doing it from 12 to 8. So early versus late. Does it matter? So studies that are comparing early and late for weight loss, the studies are mixed on whether or not early is better. So a lot of the studies say that the weight loss is the same. Some studies say early has a little bit of an advantage. So you can actually see here, we've got early losing a little bit more than late in this study. However, early time-restricted eating tends to improve some aspects of your health more than late TRE. And there are not a ton of studies directly putting them head to head, but the data we have so far suggests that if you want to improve your blood sugar and your blood pressure, then having that eating window earlier in the day is preferable. So one of the studies that's actually trying to tease that out is Dr. Peterson's meal timing study at UAB in people with prediabetes that is putting early versus late TRE. She has 4 ongoing clinical trials at UAB. I think the only one still enrolling is this chrono study, but we hopefully will have results to share with you soon, maybe next time we give a talk. But these studies are in people with prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, which is called the CLOCK study, chrono, which is a study of people with breast and rectal cancer, and then a study on whether we can slow aging in healthy people, which is called the Dial Health study. So keep an eye out if you're interested in participating in clinical research at UAB. The UAB Reporter is a great place to look for that. But we hope to be able to share these results with the UAB community soon. So in summary, some forms of intermittent fasting are easier to follow than others, with TRE being the most popular form of intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting causes modest to moderate weight loss, and a good rule of thumb for that is about 1/2 pound a week, and it improves your blood sugar control, blood pressure, and oxidative stress. Intermittent fasting is likely an effective lifestyle intervention for diseases like diabetes, hypertension, and we didn't touch on this much today, but it's also promising for fatty liver disease. Most of intermittent fasting's benefits are from losing weight, particularly from the periodic forms of intermittent fasting versus daily. And it appears to be as good as calorie counting. That said, TRE appears to have additional benefits, even if you don't lose weight. And eating earlier in the day to be in alignment with your circadian rhythms also can improve your body weight and blood sugar. So things like eating your biggest meal at breakfast. And with that, it's time for questions. And I know that we're about to go through some of your questions in the chat, but you're also welcome to reach out to me at my email, which I have here.
And I am dropping that email in the chat as well, so they can take a look at it. These are fantastic, fantastic information that you've shared. I'm going to go ahead and stop your screen share here. There we go.
There we go.
Yay!
Gotta get out of the way.
Very active chat, and I'm going to answer the most recent one first. Will the slides be available? Kind of, in a way. You can watch the replay as much as you'd like. So go ahead, once you get the link, watch as much as you want. I can't stop you from taking notes from there or anything, but it is yours. It is your resource. So Olivia did tell me that there may be some questions she can't answer just because of the area of expertise, but we're going to try to get as much of these answered as possible up until close to the 1 o'clock hour. So any of these studies, have they been repeated with people on GLP-1s?
So that's actually really interesting. I do not off the top of my head know of studies combining intermittent fasting with GLP-1s. And I think the reason for this is the fact that people on GLP-1s typically are struggling to eat enough food anyway. So people on GLP-1 drugs typically are eating less. We're seeing, issues with trying to make sure people are eating enough nutrients, eating enough protein. And people on GLP-1s are also already losing a really dramatic amount of weight. So I think there might be a case for figuring out what's the best time of day for people on GLP-1 drugs. But right now, I think a lot of the GLP-1 dietary research is focused more on making sure people get enough nutrients and are able to maintain their muscle mass versus trying to help them lose more weight, if that makes sense.
Is coffee also excluded during fasting periods?
Excellent question. So some research studies get really strict with it, and they say people can't have caffeine outside of their eating hours. We find that's not really sustainable for most people. So in our studies here at UAB, and in general, what we recommend to people, you're perfectly welcome to have coffee, tea, caffeinated beverages, as long as there's 0 calories. So unfortunately, if you're a person who likes, a creamy coffee in the morning, you may have to settle for just, an artificial sweetener or something like that. But, you can have, coffee, artificially sweetened tea, artificially sweetened coffee, and a lot of places have sugar-free syrups now to accommodate that.
Is safe recommended for those who are already, intermittent fasting.
Yeah.
That's just showing my ignorance right now. Is intermittent fasting safe or recommended for those who are already at a healthy weight?
So that's also a really interesting question. So, if you're already at a healthy weight, you're not trying to lose any more weight. And a lot of forms of intermittent fasting do cause weight loss. So there's a study called the Dial Health study, which I mentioned very briefly, which is in people who are already at a healthy weight. And they're trying to see if there's an additional benefit and if it can help slow aging. There are also some studies in healthy resistance trained individuals that we're seeing if it can improve sports performance. So, if you don't have any issues with your blood sugar, your blood pressure, you're at normal weight, maybe we wouldn't say, yeah, you really need to do it. But we're trying to figure out now if there's some additional benefits for aging and things like that. So it's possible. However, especially the time restricted eating, I don't think there would be like a huge health risk to doing it if you're at a healthy weight, as long as you're making sure you're not losing a lot of weight. Or if you do that 10-hour window a day, we don't tend to see a lot of weight loss. So keeping that window longer. But you also could try approaches just like making sure you're eating your breakfast as your largest meal of the day and you're not eating too late of a dinner. There are also healthy people who have issues with controlling their blood sugar and blood pressure. So, if you have issues with those things, obviously consulting with your doctor or a dietitian on whether adding intermittent fasting might potentially help with those.
Are the benefits of intermittent fasting greater than simply as a result of weight loss, or are they seen with calorie counting weight loss as well?
So, great question. So a lot of the studies that I showed you compared directly intermittent fasting, calorie counting, and then people doing neither. And most forms of intermittent fasting, if you can have people lose the exact same number of calories as the people, or cut the exact same number of calories that the people are cutting, they're doing intermittent fasting. Most types of intermittent fasting, you see a similar benefit. So there are 2 kind of things to think about here. Number 1 is for some people, it's just a lot easier to count time versus counting calories. So it may not be more beneficial in some contexts, but it might be easier to do And a lot of the issue with diet is that it's hard for people to stick to. So if it helps people stick, that's a benefit. But with time restricted eating, we do see that there's a benefit even if you don't lose weight and you don't cut calories. So specifically people that are eating that earlier window earlier in the day, even if they don't lose weight, they don't cut calories, there's still maybe some improvements for blood sugar and blood pressure with that specifically. And we think that's due to aligning with that circadian rhythm that tells your body, or it helps your body digest carbs and things earlier in the day.
What about time windows for those who exercise? What would be the ideal fasting window for someone that exercises first thing in the morning?
Okay, so this one's a little complicated, and maybe you can follow up with me on email to see, because I'll have to check the most recent research on this. There is research coming out on this, like this is a very hot topic right now. There was not a lot of research. So an issue we have in the field is that you have nutrition researchers like me and Dr. Peterson, and then you have exercise researchers, who we have some amazing ones at UAB as well. And we tend to study them separately. And so it's really hard for us to have studies where we're saying that the benefit is due to one or the other if you're doing both. So there's not a lot of studies ongoing that are saying when is the best time to eat versus exercise. But I think Colorado, they're doing a handful of studies on this, where they're measuring people's glucose level throughout the day as they exercise and they intermittent fast. So I don't know if those results are out in public yet. So if you want to hit me up by email, I'll see if I can dig some up for you.
Altonji at uab.edu for anybody that wants to send an email. Let's see here. Next question. There's so many good ones, and I'm trying to get to a few before we get off. What advice do you have for a 66-year-old high stress vegetarian woman who is only eating every other day, drinking water on fasting days?
Interesting. Okay, so it's interesting because it's a lot of people are not doing the every other day, the water only fast. So I am also a vegetarian person. So I mean, if this is working for you, it's sustainable for you, and you're enjoying it, then keep doing what you're doing. However, if you want to try something that is a little bit more flexible with your lifestyle, or people, when we have those alternate day fasting studies, people tended to be really hangry. So if you don't feel good on those days you're doing the water only fast, you definitely could try a time restricted eating approach instead. So instead of doing a complete fast every other day, you could do that time restricted eating instead and see if that works for you. Also, you could try the alternate day modified fasting where you're adding a meal on that water only fasting day. But if you're more concerned about specifics with your health situation, definitely consulting your doctor and a dietitian. Dietitians are amazing, and they are the best kind of medical resource for figuring out exactly what your dietary needs are and how to meet those.
How do you keep from getting leg cramps with TRE?
How do I keep from getting leg cramps? So I'm not sure if this is addressing potentially actually, I don't know. Somebody follow up with me. Why are you concerned about the leg cramps with the time restricted eating? That's not really something that we get reported as a side effect in a lot of our studies. I guess if the concern is, electrolytes or something like that, you absolutely can stay hydrated with no calorie electrolyte beverages. But we encourage people doing TRE to drink a lot of fluids all times of the day that they're awake. Obviously, don't drink a ton right before you go to bed because they'll help keep you up at night. So yeah, but the time restricted eating, again, we don't typically see a lot of things like that with that shorter fasting windows.
And the last question, I think this is fantastic. How does intermittent fasting affect metabolism when someone starts and stops over time?
Okay, so intermittent fasting, as I showed in that slide with the cute little room, intermittent fasting is not changing the rate of your metabolism, right? So you're not actually burning more calories when you're intermittent fasting. However, when you're fasting for longer periods of time, you are burning more fat, and you're also better able to control your blood sugar. So if you're starting and stopping intermittent fasting, I'm not sure if this person's directly referring to like, doing a periodic fast and then not for a period of time, or if you just want to do intermittent fasting for a short period of time and then restart later. We think it's really important to eat your meals at a consistent time every day. So, if you're thinking, I only want to do TRE 2 days a week or 3 days a week, and then the other days I'm going to not do it, then it probably wouldn't have a benefit for your health and might also be worse if you're making your meal schedule crazy. But overall, we think that, trying to stay as consistent as possible. That's why intermittent fasting, part of it is defined as periodic, is that you're keeping a regularly scheduled fasting schedule. So you're doing that alternate day fasting every other day. You're doing that 5-2 fasting, 2 times a week. So regularity is really important. But overall, it's not going to be, it's not like the keto diet where you like get the keto flu if you come off and then you go back on or something like that.
And thank everybody for all of the good questions. And sorry we can't get all of them addressed. And Dr. Altonji, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you everyone so much for your attention and also your really excellent questions.
And thanks again. And just a quick note for today's audience, this webinar was recorded. Once it's uploaded on our website, you'll get an email with the link so you can revisit the session or share it with others. As for the next 4 webinars on tap for you, join us for the following. On June 9th, make sure you're getting the most out of your legacy during Your Estate, Your Legacy, Key Decisions That Matter. On July 28th, we start a series of artificial intelligence topics with Everyday AI, Smart Tools for Work and Life. On August 13th, the second of that AI series, as we host Good, Risky, or Unknown, the ethics of everyday AI. And on August 27th, we're going to wind down the series with Behind the Screens, what AI-powered care means for patients. You can register for any of these and more at alumni.uab.edu/events. As we wrap up, we'd love to hear from you. Your feedback helps us improve and shape future webinar topics. Just scan the QR code on your screen to access a brief survey and share your thoughts. Once again, thanks so much for joining us. And as always, go Blazers.